Greetings. So, I want to do a quick follow-up to a wonderful discussion we had in the seminar today of whether Martin Heidegger can be seen as a naturalist philosopher. What is the relationship to Heidegger and this picture from protons to presidents, this biological, materialist, reductionist naturalism? First of all, let me once again express my immense gratitude to everybody who participates in the course, especially offline. It's always a joy. We have such a wonderfully cosmopolitan course this year. Students from different backgrounds, from different programs. It's always very stimulating, at the very least. Let's put it that way. So, but let me try to address the question. So, I do want to talk at some point about Heidegger at great length and in great detail. So, but let me try to start somewhere, right? So, when I use the word phenomenology, which is not necessarily very well defined, so Heidegger's phenomenology, what do I mean? So basically, I want to say some of you have studied philosophy last year. Some of you didn't, so it's okay. This course officially has no prerequisites, so I'm filling in the blanks. So we have this tradition that Heidegger himself would say goes back to Plato. I'm a fan of a skeptical reading of Plato, so I don't know. I prefer not to attribute strong doctrines to Plato. I think Plato was a very, what's the right phrase? Was a very open-minded philosopher, so I would not necessarily want to lay the blame at Plato's feet. So, but certainly, you have philosophers such as Descartes, and maybe to some extent also very importantly Kant, right? And these are the philosophers who see human beings as maybe immortal souls, if you want, so free subjects in the world of objects, free subjects. Again, I don't think this picture applies very much to Plato, but, sometimes Plato is blamed for this picture, so, I'm including him here, even though I don't believe that Plato is here, so let me maybe cross Plato out like this. I think it's a misreading of Plato to read him in this way. So, immortal souls, free subjects in the world of physical objects. And this picture has aspects of dualism, and, it's ahistorical. It's ahistorical. When I say dualism, Descartes very explicitly talks about how we are immaterial minds, res cogitans, trapped in material bodies, res extensa. Res cogitans means thinking thing, and res extensa means extended thing, the two domains of the mental and the material, right? And I want to say, so let's leave naturalism with a question mark, but phenomenology, well, of course, very importantly here, Husserl is going to be an object of Heidegger's attack. And Husserl is also a phenomenologist. So when I talk about phenomenology in this course, I only mean Heidegger's phenomenology, because there are other different kinds of phenomenology. I mean, Hegel uses the word phenomenology in a completely different fashion. So, but I want to say, again, so phenomenology from the Greek word phainein, which means to show itself, is basically what it means is we're trying to pay attention to our experience, the way it presents itself to us. So Descartes very famously does this thought experiment. So as an officer in an army, he was trapped. I don't want to say trapped. He was, during a snowstorm or something like that, he was inside a stove. This was somewhere in Bohemia, I think. So it was cold, and inside a stove there's a special compartment. You can get in there. So it was dark, it was warm. So to a large extent, it's a very unnatural human condition. And so Descartes, detached from the world, this freelance officer, detached in his stove, and he imagines, what am I? What am I, says Descartes. And he says, I'm this immortal soul, and even my body, I have this interesting relationship to my body, but I am not my body, right? And I think what Heidegger would respond is that we need to go back to the phenomena. We need to go back and try to pay attention to life as we live it every day. And sitting in stoves, thinking about whether you exist or whether the evil demon is deceiving you, that's not our normal experience. That's also a part of our experience. So I don't think that Heidegger wants to dismiss Descartes, but he wants to say that Cartesian skepticism, Cartesian dualism, all of this stuff, it comes in one step too late, if you want. It's something that human beings do sometimes, right? As members of a culture, etc., etc. It's not a natural, it's not an automatic thing. It's not the first thing that we do. It's not what we are by nature, if you want. Some people are like that, but that's not what we are by nature. So actually what we are by nature is, Heidegger has all these different phrases. So he uses the word Dasein, which in German to some extent just means existence or subject. It has been used, Dasein has been used in history of philosophy before Heidegger to refer to human subjectivity. But Heidegger, again, the German words Dasein literally means being there. So in some sense, Heidegger wants to say that we always, this is very important, we find ourselves, so what is Heidegger's phenomenology? How is it different from Descartes, from Kant, from Husserl? Heidegger wants to say that first of all, we find ourselves. And there's a wonderful German word that Heidegger uses, Befindlichkeit. If you want to translate this into English, it would be befindedness. Befindlichkeit. I'm not sure if I'll be able to spell it. Something like this. So we find ourselves, and we find ourselves thrown into this world. So this is another German word, Geworfenheit. So we are thrown into this world. I'm giving German not because I want to oppress you with terminology, but if you understand German, this probably should help or will help. And some of my students I know understand German. So we find ourselves thrown into this world. Yeah, we are anxious. So this is Sorge. We are anxious, and our existence is always an issue for us. But says Heidegger, we're essentially anxious. But the idea is that, again, like you find yourself in a certain body with certain beliefs, with certain desires. You find yourself, as a part of a particular situation, and you have not chosen to be born in this body, right? You find yourself already thrown into this world, and you find yourself already caring about the world. Like our existence is an issue for us, and this is a deep relationship I feel between Heidegger and philosophers before him. David Hume is going to say something very similar, right? Reason is and ought to be the slave of the passions, says Hume. Right? We are deeply driven beings, and this is why I think the challenge against Plato is not very fair, because Plato also understands that human beings are driven by passions, driven by desire. Philosophers are not driven by rationality for Plato. They're driven by desire, passionate desire to know, the kind of desire that keeps you awake at night. Some of you might have had an experience like that, right? And So Heidegger is going to say that most of the time, if we really pay attention to what we are doing, we are just going along with the flow. We are acting unconsciously. So now this is where you have to understand. Heidegger would not be very sympathetic to the naturalist picture. I think that Heidegger would remind us that science is just, one way of understanding the world, but it's not a privileged way. So it's like, strange. So it's like, Heidegger would want to tame the pretensions of science to knowledge. Scientific picture, scientific story is a picture, it is a story, but it is not the picture, it is not the story. So in this sense, what I'm doing in this course, Heidegger, I think, would urge somebody like me to be slightly less pretentious and understanding that, again, science is just one way of understanding the world among many. And notice when Sean Carroll talks about poetic naturalism, I feel that there's a deep affinity between what Carroll is trying to do and what Heidegger is trying to do. And I mean, obviously, these are different philosophers, and they have very different temperaments. I'm not saying that Carroll is Heidegger. I'm not saying that Heidegger is Carroll. But I feel that there's a certain congeniality, right? There's a certain productive dialogue to be had between the two. But also, I want to say that, the biological picture, and this is something I don't think Heidegger was particularly sympathetic to, but what the biological picture is going to tell us is that, again, when we actually, Heidegger says, pay attention to what you're doing, so much of what you're doing is automatic, unconscious. Let me add these words, right? So automatic / unconscious behavior. So it's like it's an interesting connection with Marx, actually, what Heidegger is doing here. It's like, again, I'm typing on a keyboard. It's not like I make a rational decision every step of the way. Like, I should press this key, then I should press that key. No, in an important respect, my body takes over. I want to say a phrase. I don't have to think, like, where I place my tongue and my mouth, right? It's something that my body does. And so many things, like waving hands, is something I completely do not control. In fact, in an important respect, maybe even my speech I don't completely control. Because, and this is my connection. So again, phenomenology is not naturalism. Naturalism is not phenomenology. But I feel there's a deep connection. Because when you realize, as a matter of your own personal subjective experience, that so much of what you do is automatic and unconscious, you ask yourself, okay, but if I have not chosen to be this way, if I have not chosen to do this thing or that thing, what has, right? And this is how inside points outside. So it's like, simple example, we are disgusted by rotting meat. Most people, disgusted by rotting meat. But you haven't chosen to be disgusted by rotting meat. You were born, you are thrown into this situation with the feeling of disgust. But why? Why? Biology maybe would be able to account for the story. Or you could say, it's like, we can speak a language, you immediately understand the words that I'm saying. This is less, to some extent, speech, as far as we can tell, biological. Say hi to Chomsky, Noam Chomsky, language acquisition device, right? But in addition to this, I have some Chomsky fans in the room, but also, so some things are cultural, right? So you being able to understand certain things in certain ways, or certain gestures in a certain way. Like, I could do something offensive, and this would offend you automatically. You don't choose to be offended. Or like I could say, I could do this, right? You immediately understand that I am cheering up on you. I'm saying, yeah, good, excellent, right? So me doing this, you immediately understand it, and notice, it's not your conscious choice to understand. You understand it automatically. Again, you see? So biology and culture, to some extent, pre-program us with particular instincts. But again, particular instincts, particular automatic unconscious reactions. Heidegger, I think, again, in general, would be somewhat less sympathetic to this reductionist aspect of the philosophy that I'm giving you. But at the same time, I think that Heidegger, by and large, his picture is compatible with what we're doing in unfolding the naturalist picture. So I want to say Heidegger is not necessarily a naturalist, but he's a very productive interlocutor for naturalism. He's a very productive member of a conversation, of a dialogue with a naturalist picture, right? And what unites Heidegger with naturalism, and the reason why I bring up Heidegger in a course like this, is because both Heidegger and the naturalist attack Descartes, right? And again, we have this picture of immortal souls and free subjects, and Heidegger is going to say, no, I am a coping being. I find myself as a part of the situation. I am continuous with the situation. There is no dichotomy between subject and object. Human beings are continuous with the world around them. This formula would also tell you that you are continuous with the world around you. So there is no sharp separation. So against subject-object distinction, we are, again, our subjectivity is produced by the objective world around us, right? And also this idea of so this is not going to be opposition to dualism, subject-object dualism. But also, Kant's thought and Descartes' thought, I could add John Locke if you want. So this is, in some sense, Heidegger is a critic of the liberal tradition. So is Marx. So is Hegel, critics of the liberal tradition. And part of an important criticism of the liberal tradition is that human beings are historical. We are historical beings. And for Heidegger, this is very important. That, again, we find ourselves as part of a culture that exists historically. Our being is, to a large extent, historically determined, right? So Herder deploys this argument against Kant. Subjectivity is linguistic. Language is cultural. Culture is historical. Therefore, subjectivity is historical. There's a way of understanding being, right? And Heidegger wants to say that the ancient Greeks, for example, had one way of understanding the being, being, like the whole universe. It's Die Stellung des Menschen im Kosmos, right? The place of man in the universe was understood by the Greeks in a particular fashion. And then, let's say, by the Middle Ages, there was a different understanding. So, let's say, Middle Ages. And today we have a different understanding, and this is technological understanding of being, and Heidegger is very wary of that. And again, I absolutely promise we're going to have a whole separate lecture on this. So this is one of my battle objectives for my course this year, to do a good lecture on Heidegger, a good lecture on Lacan, and a good lecture on Marx. These are the 3 lectures I'm most looking forward to this year. One way or another, before the end of December, I owe you a good rundown of all this, right? But Heidegger, like Marx, like Weber, like so many other philosophers, he is concerned with our technological understanding of being, that you have this, again, anonymous structural drive of efficiency for the sake of efficiency, which leads us to dominate nature, to dominate each other, to dominate ourselves, and in dominating nature and each other, we become unhappy. And maybe you could have a different understanding of being, like in the ancient Greeks, or maybe in the poetry of Hölderlin, or maybe, in the Japanese Zen Buddhism. It's a moment, a customary moment to appreciate the mystery of being, Heidegger would say. So I don't want to leave Marx hanging in the air, because I want to make this explicit connection between Marx and Heidegger. And this is basically being attentive to social conditions of thought. That sort of thought has conditions. Thought has conditions. See, Heidegger is going to say, Descartes is thinking these dualistic thoughts because he finds himself in a particular abnormal situation. Marx is going to say something very similar. Aristotle, for example, believes that labor is demeaning, and you need to have slaves by nature so that some people can be free. And Marx is going to say this is not an abstract thought. It's a thought that proceeds from Aristotle's situation as a beneficiary of the slave-owning society of the ancient Greeks, right? So social conditions of thought. And of course, Heidegger doesn't talk about this very much, but I feel to a very large extent, Michel Foucault is going to be a synthesis of, is going to synthesize insights from Nietzsche and Heidegger, and insights from Marx. Especially this idea that maybe, again, Heidegger doesn't say that, but Foucault is going to fill in the blanks, right? So Heidegger just says there are different understandings of being in different times and in different places, and Foucault is going to say, yes, and this changes basically for reasons of economic efficiency. Again, structural economic efficiency, like in microeconomics classes, we are price takers, right? Something like that. Obviously a very oversimplified example, but there's a logic of competition. Again, evolution, and natural selection, cultural selection are always there in the background as we're talking about these things, right? But again, this concern with technological understanding of being and looking for different ways of being human, alternative ways of existing, of being human, right? This is an interesting question for Heidegger, for Foucault, for Nietzsche, for so many philosophers. And this is an important practical takeaway point, if you want, from these discussions. Okay. Yeah, another important notion I definitely should add to the board: anti-humanism. Now, this is a careful term that we have to be careful with, but I want to talk about this a little bit, right? What do I mean by talking about anti-humanism? So this is human, like anthropocentrism. So anti-humanism as in anti-anthropocentrism. Understanding that the human being is a product of larger forces. This is exactly what Heidegger is talking about. Jean-Paul Sartre very famously had an article which was called "Existentialism is Humanism." Existentialism is humanism. And Sartre was under deep influence of Martin Heidegger, right? And Heidegger, in response to that, wrote his famous letter on humanism. where he basically says that humanism is a kind of misunderstanding. Again, it's this Cartesian mistake where you see yourself as this free individual human being, you human, it's all about you, anthropocentrism. Whereas in fact, human beings are product of larger forces, right? Heidegger doesn't necessarily use my phrase, larger force of biological and cultural evolution, but he says that the human being is a clearing, a Lichtung, a clearing, and being shines through us. Being shines through us. Again, I get so many Buddhist vibes every time we talk about Heidegger. Some students have promised to do a presentation on Heidegger and Buddhism. I hear, as far as I know, that there's a connection, and we'll hear more about this connection. So I hope this kind of, explains the picture that we talked about yesterday at least a little bit better, right? So I was trying to talk about 3 angles on naturalism, talking about how the naturalist picture of the world very successfully appears to explain away all semblance of purposefulness. Because you see, for Heidegger, this is also true. It's not like we have these mental projects and we're trying to bring nature under our control, right? So Heidegger, I feel, in some important sense, also is anti-teleological. So much of our decisions or actions that we take are automatic, unconscious, non-teleological, not directed to any goals. We just do things because we find ourselves in particular situations, right? Again, it's like Heidegger and Freud, deep connections I feel between Heidegger and Freud, are both gonna remind us that Descartes, before you sat there in a stove imagining you're a disembodied spirit, you were a young child and you were taken care of by your parents, but you also were, beaten up or indoctrinated by your parents, shaped by societies in good ways, but also in bad ways, maybe. So I was talking about the success of the naturalist picture. And then, we have to be aware that the naturalist picture, even though I recommend it highly and I'm a passionate adherent of the naturalist picture, at the same time, I do want to remind us that this picture is limited. We don't know it 100%. But also at the same time, it's like I feel that there's a deep phenomenological corroboration of this naturalist picture, that actually if we pay attention to our experience in the correct fashion, we see ourselves, again, as these products with these, human being, the human being is a bundle of coping mechanisms, right? This is more about Freud, but I feel, again, that Heidegger is broadly speaking on board with this picture. Okay, I wanted to keep this short. I hope this is clear enough. I hope this is clearer than the lecture I gave yesterday. Definitely, the full lecture on Heidegger is coming. I think I'm going to pause this here. Some people are saying hi in the chat. Hi to you as well. Again, it's always very nice to input from you people is incalculably valuable to me. I deeply appreciate all the input. I feel my brain expanding and I feel my thought moving forward. And very often students ask what they think is an innocuous question, but it actually leads me to understand better what I'm trying to say or see it from another angle. So Brian, Maxim, if you don't mind me, I remember you, Maxim is the Pythagorean. I deeply appreciate your Pythagorean leanings. I have those too. And Kartoffelmanden. Yeah, my German is a bit too rusty. So greetings, colleagues. And I think I'm going to wrap up the stream now. But more live streams are coming. This is just a short follow-up to the seminar I wanted to record. I'm just back from the university. It's so nice to be back. In the university, seeing people face to face. Unfortunately, lectures for, quarantine reasons have to be online. But at least we get the joy of seminar, talking face to face. Okay, apologies. Let me shut up here. But until next time, colleagues, thank you for joining me. Thank you so much. Stay safe and take care.